for anybody who knows anything about FIRE, that stands for Financially Independent, Retire Early. We're going to talk about that now because Monica and I kind of alluded to it briefly when we were talking about how we plan to be financially stable if one of us were to pass. And I remember talking to Monica about the 4% rule. And part of that has to do with being financially independent and retiring early, because a lot of people talk about the 4% rule when they want to retire early. And I just wanted to briefly talk with you guys about that, because if you guys are going to come out here and you're going to make money, don't just spend it all. Don't live your life like that, because in every hospital that I've worked with several healthcare workers, not just nurses, that were with so much debt because they got so used to just spending all of the money that they made. And there are nurses, there's doctors, there's a respiratory therapist, there's techs, everybody all across the board. And this is one reason why I always try to teach people about budgeting and managing their finances and talking about pay transparency, is because I feel like if we were like more educated about our finances, we would not be in this position. Okay, so FIRE. What is FIRE? Yeah, this is just an ebook that I made. It's a short ebook. What is FIRE? Financial Independence, Retire Early. Okay, so FIRE, what is it? It is a movement where if you are looking to retire early, your goal is to save and invest at least half of your income so that you can achieve a level where you can safely withdraw 4% of your investment each year to replace your income so you can retire early. And let me talk about that a little bit, because when I say safely withdraw 4%, what I mean is, let's say, for example, you have $1 million that are invested, and you have, let's say, half of that is in your 401k, and then another half of that, $500,000, is part of investments that you made with after-tax income. And let's just say, for example, the $500,000 is all of the money, your principal that you've put into that investment. So it hasn't given you a return yet. It's just money that you put into a brokerage account and you put it into the market, but it's the first day, you haven't made any money off of it. So take that as an example, right? You have your 401k and then you have this $500,000 that you just put in the market and you want to invest. If that money grows, you pay the IRS for withdrawing that money after you've exceeded your principal, so the amount that you put in. So let's say you withdraw $500,000. What you withdraw after that is what will be taxed, right? But it also, there's a lot of nuances to it. And remember, I'm not an accountant. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm just explaining it as I see it. So don't take my word for it. You should seek an accountant if you want to know more about the nuances about when it comes to this. So if you want to retire early and you want to withdraw 4%, that 4% of the $1 million that you withdraw is what you will be living off of, right? But many people in the United States are not going to be able to live off of $40,000 a year, right? So you want that portfolio to be worth more than $1 million. So I'm going to go over how to calculate these numbers and the different levels of FIRE, so you know if one of them makes more sense for you than the other. So we have, what is FIRE? So there's different variations, right? Where an individual could either live off an income that ranges from as little as $10,000 a year to $100,000 a year. And I mentioned this in our coaching program, but what this means is you could be living in another country. You could be living in Mexico, you could be living in Thailand, in Vietnam, you could be living in the Philippines and live off of $10,000 a year. Well, Mexico is getting more expensive, but let's just say you're in those other third world countries and $10,000 a year is what you can live off of. But if you're living in a country like Switzerland, anywhere in Europe, like the UK, the US, and Canada, you're not going to be able to live on $10,000 a year. So you need more than that. That's why you're going to need at least, on average, like let's say $100,000 a year. So lean FIRE, there's different types, right? There's lean FIRE, and then lean FIRE is when you can live off of $10,000 to $40,000 a year. But to reach FIRE level, you need, and inflation has probably, this has to change because inflation has increased. So these numbers probably should be increased as well. $50,000 to $90,000 is when you can retire and say you've reached FIRE, financial independence, and retired early. That's the normal level for most people. They want to just reach FIRE. For those people who are like the higher income earners, like me and Monica, for example, we want to reach fat FIRE. Well, we said we used to want to reach Fat Fire, and I'll explain why that has changed. But $100,000 to $200,000 a year is what these people want to reach. And people talk about Fat Fire. A lot of the times they say anything over $100,000. But there's another level that not many people talk about, because mostly Fat Fire is where it ends. Even people who want to retire with like $1 million a year, they say, I want to reach Fat Fire. But there's Obese Fire. Let's say there's Obese Fire, and it's over $200,000 a year or more. All right. And that's how much income you need in retirement in order to consider yourself at that level. So how do you calculate this number? All right. Your FIRE number is calculated by using the 4% rule. Like I mentioned before, basically is a rule that means that if you withdraw 4% from your savings annually, adjusted for inflation every year following the first, then you will have your income last for the rest of your life passively. That's basically what it means. So let's use this as an example. Let's say the average rate of inflation, that means the cost of any goods, cost of rent, the cost of groceries, the cost of everything has gone up every single year on average by 3%. That means that if you withdraw 4% from your investments on an annual basis and inflation has gone up 3%, right? Inflation has gone up 3% and you are withdrawing 4%. That is right there, that is 7%, right? So you need to make more than that in order to make sure that you always have money left over when you withdraw that money. Or I mean, your investments have to grow more than that in order for you to be able to withdraw 4% and still have your money continue to grow, or at least remain consistent for the rest of your life. So it's either you have to make 7% or more in order for that to happen. So if you make, let's say 8% consistently for the rest of your life in your return on your investments, and you withdraw 4% and inflation goes up by 3% every single year, then you will still have that 1% in growth every single year until you pass. And this 4% rule, this 4% number has been studied over and over and over and ran through so many different scenarios. And that's how this rule came about. And they found that people who can withdraw 4% every single year will still have money left over until they reach retirement. It's more like closer to like 30, 40 years, but for the most part, people who reach retirement, right? So if your investments can grow by more than 7%, you'll be good for the rest of your life. All right, now I want to talk about like, how do you calculate this? So how do I calculate my FIRE number? First of all, to calculate your FIRE number, what you need to do is take your annual expenses, right? So let's say you spend $60,000 a year on all of your expenses. That includes your rent or your mortgage, your groceries, your utility bills, your gas, your car insurance, everything. You spend $60,000 a year. Multiply that by 25 in order to find out what number you need to reach in your portfolio before you can say you've reached FIRE. And another way to do it is, if you already have a certain portfolio size, how much would you have if you were to retire today? So in order to do that, what you could do is just do the reverse. You take 1.5 million, that's your current net worth or your current portfolio, and you divide that by 25, which is a 4% withdrawal rate. Because think about it, a quarter, 25, that's 4%, right? 4%. And if you multiply 25 by 4, you get 100. Okay, so 1.5 million divided by 25 equals $60,000 in annual income. That's how much you would have on an annual basis if you had a net worth or a portfolio, an investment portfolio of $1.5 million. So it's pretty easy. Like if you want to do like quick math, like let's say, oh man, my portfolio grew by this much this year. That means I would have this much if I were to retire today. And yeah, like I've interviewed nurses before who have, well, one of them, his name was Chris. He had a net worth when I interviewed him. This was like a year and a half ago, of like $3 million, him and his wife. They were working out here in Sacramento. They ended up selling their houses and they moved to Florida and retired early, but they had financial independence. So because they had financial independence, Chris said, maybe I can just pick up a side gig, and he started working at an ICU there. And he did it because it was optional, not because it was required of him to work so they can make extra money. And that's the kind of stuff that I aim for. Like I want to get to a point where I don't have to do the things that I don't want to do, but I can do the things that I do want to do, and it's not forced upon me. Let's see, people who retire early usually end up returning to work. Yeah, so that's the thing. When someone thinks about financial independence and retiring early, it's not really like I'm just gonna sit in the couch for the rest of my life. No, those people who do retire early end up picking up hobbies. They do things, they pick up extra jobs in places that they never thought they'd be able to work, but they actually enjoy working in. That's the whole point. Like, you want to be able to do things that you truly are passionate about, and that's why you need to reach financial independence. You don't want to depend on someone else for your finances. That's the whole goal of reaching FIRE.